government clearly understands the role in technology in achieving that, and increasingly in the future, technology will be how we ensure that journeys are safe, how we ensure that people feel that the journeys they're making are safe.
We need to be competitive. It is, this is a global industry. Countries fight tooth and nail to get inward investment from both manufacturers and other bodies. Whether you like it or not, that is the game in which you're playing.
What we're going to be talking about today is trying to understand the direction that the government is going in terms of reducing carbon emissions and also trying to improve road safety. And what I'd like to do is ask Darren, if I may. Darren, what are the government objectives and targets on achieving net zero?
Our targets are, as you've said, to achieve net zero. That is our overriding target. So we have some very challenging, very high level targets around the end of sale of petrol and diesel vehicles, as you'll be aware. We are working towards that, and a lot of our policy work underneath that supports how we will deliver that, whilst also delivering a strong economy and growth and all the other things we want to within that framework. And the recently published Transport Decarbonisation Plan sets out the road to do that. And this sets out a number of actions across the whole of transport for achieving that net zero goal. And of course, this is very important at the moment, because not only is this central to government policy, we're also leading up to the holding of COP26 in Glasgow in November, when the spotlight will be firmly shone on the UK and the work that we're doing. So we're very keen to be seen to be at the front of this. So we are investing heavily in alternative technologies. We're investing heavily in automation, in connected vehicles. We're investing heavily in increasing road safety and thinking about alternative travel. So active travel has been the subject of a number of announcements recently, with potentially hundreds of millions of pounds of investments to basically get people to use the right mode for the right journey. So cycle and walk where possible. Think about using micromobility, think about using e-scooters and electric bikes, which again are an area of policy that we're currently expanding, and you'll be aware that we are currently running e-scooter trials throughout the UK. We are really trying to ensure that we use the right journey mode the right travel mode for the right journey, and investing in that. And I think it's very important that we understand, and I think government clearly understands the role in technology in achieving that, and increasingly in the future, technology will be how we ensure that journeys are safe, how we ensure that people feel that the journeys they're making are safe, how people feel that they can access the transport network, how we can reduce the barriers to using active travel modes that we see now. We see technology has been very central to achieving that.
Darren, how much has the government actually invested in achieving both the net zero and also reducing accidents on roads? What type of numbers are we talking about?
I think we're seeing investment in the tens of millions now, and there has been. I don't think I want to go through all the different announcements, because there have been quite a flurry of announcements recently. But we've seen over the last few years tens of millions of pounds of investment in research. We're now starting to see similar kinds of money being put into schemes, but over the future that will increase exponentially, and increasingly we will see some of the big ticket items, such as the funding that we spend with Network Rail and Highways England. We will see that increasingly directed towards delivering active travel, delivering decarbonisation, and actually the Transport Decarbonisation Plan is a bit like the word Blackpool written through the stick of rock. Increasingly it will be written through all our policies, through all our activities will be about decarbonisation, and certainly ministers already are pushing this, and whatever goes before ministers, one of the questions that comes back is, how does this contribute to decarbonisation? So I think what you'll see is not necessarily lots of very large, specifically decarbonisation badged policy announcements, but you'll see a very strong shift towards ensuring that that's central to all our policy decisions and all our spending commitments.
Mike, clearly this is driving a significant change in the automotive industry, and it's probably the biggest change that we've seen in the last 100 years in terms of a technology shift. What are your members telling you? What's the impact that you're seeing on the industry overall based on the government's direction?
I think what you're seeing is certainly in the marketplace and also in product planning, is the result of these issues being at the forefront of manufacturers' minds for a number of years. If you look at the latest figures, for instance, let's look at July for new car registrations in the UK. 17% of new cars can be plugged in. which obviously is, shows how much further we've got to go to achieve total zero emissions. But 17%, we expect over the course of the year, about 1 in 7 new cars will be effectively plugged in. Now, we've got 8 years to make that 7 out of 7, which is a huge task. But the fact that you have on the market today about a quarter of new models which have an electrified variant, this is the result of decisions that's been taken 5-10 years ago. Because in terms of developing a new car, that's 5 to 7 years. So in terms of that shift, it's decisions that have been taken a number of years ago to make these new technologies available to customers and increasingly affordable. Now, government policy, not just in the UK, we've seen recently the proposals for Europe and indeed other global markets are all heading in the same direction. So it's important for a UK industry to be at the forefront of this transition, making sure that we're investing in new products, new technologies, new supply chain in the UK to deliver products not just for the UK market, but for those global markets. Darren mentioned the transport decarbonisation plan and a number of other consultations that you're looking at. I think, if you look at the big picture, it is clear that road transport has to shoulder a huge amount of the burden in delivering net zero. So, in certain respects, in terms of what is achievable and by when and what is politically easier, road transport and addressing road transport is one of the easier options that needs to be addressed when you consider what you're going to also have to do subsequently in terms of home heating, industrial power, and so forth, which leads us on to the other bit of the equation, which is obviously the energy sector. And the one thing we desperately need to accelerate this transition is the rollout of infrastructure, recharging, not just for those who have driveways, but those who do not, because that's what we see as the biggest gap.
Thank you. I mean, we've talked a lot about the need for underlying technology to support the changes. We've talked about charging infrastructure. We've talked about infrastructure that's required generally to move us towards more of a net zero. There is a reliance, obviously, on semiconductors. And Mike, at the moment, one of the biggest stories in the automotive industry is the shortage that we have on semiconductors. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and what your members are telling you?
Yeah, it's a global issue, and to a certain extent, this is long COVID. All automotive manufacturers are conscious of increasing shortages of semiconductors. I mean, this is the result of decisions that were taken last year. Obviously, you knew better than I. The semiconductor industry provides about 15% of global output into the automotive industry. The bulk of it goes into personal electronics. If we think back over the past year, what has been growing? Personal electronics. Where is the automotive industry being? Well, obviously with lockdowns and so forth, levels of demand have obviously dropped. So, we are now seeing the result of that, where there is a global shortage, and it makes it very unpredictable for manufacturers to plan their production. It's not just in the UK, it's certainly across Europe. The majority of those chips come from further afield, from Asia, from North America and so forth. So these are long supply chains. And whenever there's a long supply chain, that predictability, that reliability is always a threat. And what you've got now is increased competition and the allocation going to other sectors. So, we've seen that in both production output, and now you're also seeing it in, if you like, the market, because the supply of those vehicles to new customers is becoming more erratic, and some of the waiting times are extended, which is affecting overall sales. I mentioned before about the July figures. They're down 30% from really where they should be. A lot of that, not entirely, but a lot of that is due to supply chain shortages.
I think that the semiconductor shortage has highlighted the reliance that we have on underlying technology. And both Darren and Mike, do you think as we move towards net carbon zero and net zero carbon, and also as we move towards more autonomous vehicles and intelligent transport systems and communications and connected vehicles, is there an argument that says as we build up our capability in the UK, should the government be encouraging and investing more of a sovereign capability in the UK to try and get more of a complete supply chain? Do you think the government's doing enough in that space, or is there more that could be done?
I think there's always more that could be done, but I think we are doing a lot in this space, and certainly, in terms of Build Back Better, in terms of COVID recovery, in terms of how the UK reforms itself following exit from the EU, but then increasing UK capability is a very important strand in that. We are investing heavily in home industries at the moment, and of course, this is a really important problem because what we don't want to do is simply electrify the existing vehicle fleet, because then the problems of congestion, the problems of the number of vehicle miles travelled don't go away. We need to invest not only in decarbonisation but also in more intelligent vehicles, in more connectivity, in systems that allow people to make better choices in terms of journeys. As we said, in EV charging, in local comms, in rolling out 5G, and there's a whole range of activities, all of which fundamentally rely on semiconductors, because they are all fundamentally technology-based solutions. And we need to work across the piece to deliver this. And yeah, that creates a real tension in terms of the supply chain. At the moment, we are maybe more beholden on, as Mike says, very long supply chains than maybe we'd want to be. And I know colleagues in other parts of government are working at the moment around how UK technology sector moves forward in terms of ensuring that we can maybe shorten those supply chains and build more of the basic stuff that we need here in the UK.
I mean, we've seen some great support around battery technology. We've seen battery plants being invested in, and also the power electronics and motors and drives. We've seen DER formed, which is great for the industry. It's showing that there's real commitment there to support the growth towards battery technologies and also the round of the PEMD. Do you think there's equally an understanding that there's a third leg to that, which is the underlying semiconductors that are required to do all the other pieces that you mentioned, like the infrastructure, like the communications? Or do you think there's been too much focus on just the battery side of the business, and we need to make sure that we understand the entire supply chain and the capability that we have in the UK?
I think, and again, coming from this as a transport professional and not somebody that works in semiconductors at all, I don't think there is enough understanding of that. And I don't think there is enough understanding of the fundamental need for semiconductors to basically drive everything that we do. Whether it is PEMD, whether it's batteries, vehicles, all these other things I would say are fundamentally based around computer systems which require semiconductors. And I don't think that third leg, as you put it, I don't think that is currently seen with the same prominence as batteries and PEMD and some of the other technologies. So yeah, I think there is, again, maybe a challenge to the industry, and I don't know how it does it, but is to raise its prominence, is to try and form those links and form that understanding of how absolutely central to everything we want to do the supply of semiconductors really is.
I think, if I come in here, we've been talking a lot about supply chains and this technological shift, whether that is electrification, connectivity, autonomy, and so forth. And at the heart of that, as Darren said, obviously you want to shorten your supply chains. We want to have a strong domestic manufacturing, automotive manufacturing sector. For that, we need to be competitive. It is, this is a global industry. Countries fight tooth and nail to get inward investment from both manufacturers and other bodies. And to a certain extent, whether you like it or not, that is the game in which you're playing, that you have to look at what is the offer that a particular industrial location has. And that's a reflection of skill base. It's a reflection of workforce capability. How big is the market? What is the relationship often between manufacturing and academia and R&D? What is the fundamental competitiveness of the manufacturing industry in terms of energy costs, in terms of taxation, business rates, and things like that? It's a whole package of measures. Now, your question obviously was specifically to semiconductors and vis-a-vis batteries. From the automotive perspective, you're moving to a technology, of all this technological transition. Batteries are the most sizable, both literally, they're the biggest thing that's going to go into these new vehicles, and also the most expensive. So you need to make, so that is clearly, you understand why that is most important, I think, to the industry from a purely operational perspective, but also on the value chain, especially, as Darren says, we've left Europe now. We have a trade deal with Europe, which is pretty good, generally works. But when it comes to batteries and electrification, increasingly that has to be localized. And you could make the same case, obviously, for semiconductors, in that, you know, what we talked about before, about we have extended supply chains normally into Asia and further afield. Yes, we have a UK industry, we want to grow that industry, but I'm sure the manufacturers of semiconductors here will say, well, we need to make sure that we're competitive just like the automotive manufacturers. And that's a global issue. You know, that is the challenge there, is to address all those different aspects that go into competitiveness, because be absolutely assured every other country is doing this, because the type of jobs these industries create are high value, high earning, and they're ones that they'll be fundamental to the future of the sector.
Well, thank you both. I really appreciate your time this morning. I thank you for both taking the time out to just give us a very high level view of kind of what the government is doing to try and achieve the net zero and obviously reduce the amount of accidents and improve safety on our roads. And Mike, thanks for giving us an overview of what you see going on in the industry.